right, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all are having a good day today. Just kind of get back in the swing of things. We had Labor Day weekend. I hope everyone got to do some fun stuff over Labor Day weekend. Just had a good time. Before we jump into the lecture today, though, I do want to go over a couple quick announcements. So first, I posted the homework for week 4. I want to give you all kind of a break this week. So the homework for week 4 is basically just to install MySQL Workbench and MySQL Server. Then all you have to do is just submit a Word document with a screenshot. It could be of your applications folder. It could be a program, whatever you want to do. Just make sure that it shows in some way, shape, or form that you installed MySQL Server and MySQL Workbench. If you do that, you get 100. Like I said, it's not the hardest homework you'll ever have, for sure. Apart from that, I want to go over the test just a little bit. The grades for the test, some of you did really well. Some of you could have done better, I think. So I went ahead and added a 10-point curve to that. In addition, I'm also giving everyone the opportunity to submit exam corrections. So under normal circumstances, I probably would have given partial credit. But unfortunately, the way I had the test set up in Canvas, it was a 0 or 1 type deal. So certainly, I'd encourage you to submit corrections for anything that you missed on the exam. For every exam question you do that on, I'll award half credit. So for example, let's say that you got an 80 on the exam. I applied a 10-point curve, so that'd go to a 90. Then in addition, if you submitted exam corrections on the 4 questions you would have missed, you'd get an additional 10 points added to that. So that would bring your 80 up to 100 if you do that. And then in addition, just as another example, if you got a 60 on the exam, that would have mean that you would have missed 8 questions. So if you'd have submitted exam corrections on those, you would have gotten the 10-point curve. You could also get 20 points, which is, of course, 50% credit for what you missed, which would bring your 60 up to a 90. So I don't think there's any major reason to worry about the exam grades. Certainly what's important to me is that you understand the material. If you understand the material, I'll be happy, because it means that, that's material that you understand. So that's really the main goal of this class. If there's any questions about the exam, certainly don't hesitate to let me know. One of the main things that I saw that was missed, that a little bit disappointing, was the many-to-many questions. So when I'm asking about a question of if there's an ERD, you really shouldn't have a many-to-many inside of it. So that's going to be a problem with the relationship. Beyond that, a lot of the cardinality for all the other stuff, that's determined by business rules. So it's not necessarily determined by logic. It's going to be determined by what the business rules specify. So just to kind of make note of that. Apart from that, overall, I would say satisfied with the grades. So certainly, make sure that you do the exam corrections. Should certainly greatly help your grade. But beyond that, certainly, let's jump into it. Any questions before we begin today? All right. Well, the first unit, I don't want to say is kind of boring, but it's certainly not as exciting as this unit, and it's certainly not as exciting as Unit 3. So the first unit was all about understanding what information is, what data is, what knowledge is, how we get from that point, why we need to have databases, and then also how do we model how we should maintain and store our data. Well, Unit 2 is all about actually making the databases. So today we're going to go through Chapter 3. It's just going to be a lecture. I believe Monday we'll pick up with Chapter 4, which covers the one-to-many relationship. And then on next Wednesday, we'll actually work through some examples. So you'll come to class or you'll attend via Teams, hopefully. And I'll just have MySQL Workbench open, and we'll run through some stuff together. And just kind of show some of the basics for these databases. So with that said, let's go ahead and start the lecture on Chapter 3. So the quote here is kind of funny. It says, "I want to be left alone." Now, that's not indicative of me. Certainly, if you have a question, feel free to reach out at any point. That's just from the textbook. So, and I don't think the textbook wants to be left alone either, but that's another story. Okay, so let's go ahead and review a little bit about how we model data. So of course we have entities, and we have all these different things. But the whole point of why we're doing this is to model what our database will look like. So it's just a graphical representation of the relationships and of the information we want to store. So one of the big kind of representations here is the entity. So, we think about that. We have, of course, some noun that we want to take information about. It could be a person, it could be a student, it could be a doctor, it could be a company, lots of different things that we could do. And of course, in ERD, we model that with a rectangle. Then we want to get information about that specific noun. So if we're talking about a person, we'd want to get things like their name, where they live, what their phone number is, maybe their gender, other things like that. So those are just all going to be attributes. And attributes, of course, describe the entities. So then a specific type of an attribute is an identifier. That's going to be the primary key. That's how we uniquely identify each instance of the entity. And then, of course, once we have that diagram nicely done, we're going to then take those entities, form tables. Then, of course, with the tables, we're going to have the different columns. Those are going to be the attributes. So the primary key will become the identifier. So that's really all we're doing here. So we're just taking that, and then we're going to actually make it. So before we jump into that, let's go ahead and go over some basic SQL statements here. So up top here, I have select. And this is the most important of all the SQL commands you could possibly know. What select does is it takes whatever you tell it, and it selects it. So whenever you run the query, this is what it will output. So you're selecting, it could be the entire database, it could be the entire table, it could be the entire, it could be a specific column. You have lots of options with select. Then, of course, update would allow you to actually add information into an existing table. So, it's not really practical to have 100% of the data already installed, or not installed, but already present. So update allows you to do that. You can certainly modify the data. You can certainly find some mistakes, stuff like that. Insert actually lets you take new data and put it inside the table. And then lastly, delete allows you to remove data that is present within inside of your table. So, the first thing we want to talk about is how do we actually create a table? Well, if you'll think back to the previous slide, we use a create statement. So what we're doing here is we're creating a table. We're calling it share. We have an open parentheses there. Then we're going to have all of our attributes listed. It's best practice to put the primary key first. So you'll see the share code here is a primary key. We define that down here using a primary key statement. Then, of course, over here on the right, we have the data types. So in this particular case, share code is going to be some sort of ticker to uniquely identify each instance of the share. So, for example, this is using character 3, means that we have A through Z, up to 3 characters there. So that's not necessarily going to be realistic. Think about a ticker like Microsoft, MSFT. That's not allowed by this definition. So we'd have to make that a char 4 if we want to allow for 4-character, share codes. So keep that in mind. Of course, we have the data type. Then we have the amount of characters that can be present. So here we have varchar, means we can do pretty much any any text we want to put in there. So it could be A through Z, it could be symbols, it could be numbers. We have lots of options. We can have that be up to 20 characters in length. And not null means that it must be present. So we have the primary key. That is implied that it must be present. We cannot have an instance without having it have a primary key assigned to it. But share affirm, for whatever reason they assigned, is not null. So we have different sorts of data types here. Of course, we have decimal, which of course is a data type that includes a decimal point. So certainly keep those things in mind. For the exercise, we're going to skip that for now. I'm going to, like I say, it's your homework assignment, so make sure to do this at some point. It doesn't have to be right now, but it certainly can. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about these data types, though. So we have some numeric types, we have some string types, and we have some date and time types. So basically, we have different options depending on how long we want our numeric value to be. For example, if we wanted to have a very small integer value, we'd use a small int. If we wanted to allow for a decimal point, we'd be limited to either float or decimal. And if we want to have a larger integer, we could, of course, use the integer data type. So those are just some of the basics there. There's a lot of specific things about them. I certainly wouldn't have you memorize any of these, but you could be asked about them. So make sure that you can easily find this information should you need it. Then, of course, string, we can have character, which is going to be a fixed length character. We can have a varchar, which is going to allow us to have additional character types and also to have a variable length. And then lastly, of course, we could have text, which text will be very long. It can be, at least. Then, of course, we have date time variables. Those are pretty self-explanatory. Depending on what information you want to encompass about your date or time, you would use the corresponding data type. So any questions so far? Certainly feel free to jump in with any questions if you have them. But for now, let's go ahead and look at this table right here. So this is our share table. And as you can see, they underline share code, which is the primary key. So uniquely identifies each instance, which in this case are represented by these rows. So an instance is now a row. So we have share firm, that's the company name, which of course cannot be null. We have the share price, telling what the price is per share, how many shares we hold, the share quantity. We have share dividends. I believe that is the dividends per share, not the dividends overall. And then lastly, we have the share price to earnings ratio at the end here. So that's what we have inside this table. Let's go ahead and see how we can insert new data into this. So we're just going to use the insert into statement. So we're going to insert data into share. Of course, share is the table name. So then we just have what we want to insert. So at first we have the different columns that we want to insert. So in this case, we're inserting share code, share firm, share price, share quantity. You see the point. Now, if we didn't have one of these columns that was not a required column, we would not import anything for that specific column. So for example, if we left off share quantity, we wouldn't import any data about share quantity. The order here is very important. It corresponds with the order you had above. So you have the share code first. That means whatever you have inside of the first statement there. So before the first comma, that's going to be whatever you put there. Second comma corresponds to there, and so on. So the order is extremely important. You don't want to have these in different orders because otherwise you just define what order they're going to go in. So these are your values that you're going to insert. And of course, you have different options for how you do that. In this case, you're not defining the order of them. You're just using the default order from the table. So you could do that way as well. It's probably going to be best practice to specifically define the order of what you're importing, or inserting, I should say. But you can do it either way. So does that make sense to everybody? Again, all we're doing is we're inserting data using a good friend, the insert. Okay. Another way you could do this, of course, is inside of MySQL Workbench. You could do this kind of manually, where you open up the table, and you could do it in a kind of more graphical fashion if you'd like. You'll probably do that some in class. Sometimes it could be easier to import just a couple rows this way. But I certainly would recommend that you're familiar with how to import data. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about how we could actually get data outside, to get it returned to us. So how can we go about that? Well, we would use a select statement. So I said select is probably the most important thing in the entirety of this class. And here it is right here. So in this case, we're selecting star. Now that star refers to all of the columns within inside whatever tables we're selecting from. So in this case, we're dealing with a single table here, and it's called share. So we're selecting everything inside of that table. That's what that asterisk refers to. I'll probably use star because asterisk can be a little bit challenging to say, but certainly keep that in mind. That's what that character refers to. So we're getting all of the data, we're just outputting it. So when we just select star, it'll return the table. Then, of course, we could be more specific than that. We don't have to say select star. we could say select share code, comma, share firm from share, and it'll only output these two columns. So we're still getting everything in here because we're not selecting any sort of criteria. We'll get to that in a couple slides. But we don't have to use star. We could certainly use whatever we want. So someone in the audience, how could I select the share quantity from this table? What would that statement read? Yeah. So you wouldn't actually put the star in there. The star is only if you're wanting everything from the table. And you also don't have to include the share code when you're just outputting the thing. So it could just be select share quantity from share. Certainly that's how you would do that. So here's just another example here. We're going to choose some columns. So what they're doing here is they're reporting a firm's name and price to earnings ratio. So they're just selecting share firm, which is the firm's name, and the share price to earnings ratio from share. So you see how they did that. They put a comma there in between the two columns that they wanted. Of course, if you wanted to do 3 columns, you would say select maybe share code, comma, share firm, comma, share PE, comma, or not another comma, from share. So that's what you're doing there. One thing I probably should make note of, this semicolon is how you end the statement. So once you've done everything you want to inside the statement, you put a semicolon. You don't have to, but it's best practice to. If you have a large amount of SQL statements, this becomes very important. If you're doing a single SQL statement, you can just run that single statement without having the semicolon. But it is best practice to use it. Just like it's best practice to state the order whenever you're inserting into the table. Okay, so now let's talk about how we could maybe limit, not get every single thing we have in a given column. So we want to do some basic restrictions here. We're going to select certain rows. We only want to output certain things in this case. So what we're going to do here is select all the firms where the price to earnings ratio is less than 10. So SQL allows us to do this very simply. We would just do select star because we want everything about these firms, but we only want to do this where the share price to earnings ratio, which of course this column right here, is less than 10. So this is a great way to do this. Now let me ask the audience here, what if I only wanted to get the share price to earnings ratio in the share firm? How could I do that where it's less than 12? If I just wanted to get these two columns, the share code and the share price to earnings ratio, where the share price to earnings ratio is less than 12. Looks like we got an answer in chat. Let's see what it says. I'm not sure what you mean by insert a function. You're not really inserting anything. You're just selecting data that's already there in this case. So another question was, we want to use this when files are large so we don't have to slow speeds. You know, I believe that's referring to the semicolon. It won't really affect speeds so much, but you could run into cases where it does a nested statement when you didn't mean for it to do a nested statement. So that's certainly something you would want to do. When you start getting into larger files, you're probably going to benefit by having various things like maybe sorting already done on it. You would also probably want to add some sort of a index to the file. We'll cover that in later chapters. So certainly a great question. All you'd have to do, though, if you only wanted 2 different columns, is you do select share code, comma, share PE from share where share PE is less than 12. So if I wanted to have this be greater than 12, I just change that to a greater than sign. If I wanted to have it be greater than equals to, we could do that as well. We do greater than equals to. We have lots of different options. It's highly flexible. It's a very powerful tool that we have. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about you know, getting some columns in. That's what we just discussed. So in this case, we're getting the share firm, share price, share quantity, and share dividend from share where share quantity is greater than or equal to 100,000. So this is saying of the data we have inside of our table here, we want to get it only if the share price is, or share quantity rather, is greater than 100,000. That means this person has quite a substantial portion of a company. So from this, we see we have Burmese elephant, Bolivian sheep, and Royal Ostrich Farms. I'm not sure what those are, but I'm assuming they're some sort of company. All right. So now, of course, we could do this. We could say, report the name and the price of those shares where the price is greater than 10. So let's take a look at this. We have the name. So we're going to do select share firm, comma, the share price from share where share price is greater than 10. That's all we have to do for that. So certainly it's pretty simple. SQL is very flexible like that. It allows us to do a lot of powerful things. But we're not quite done yet. In fact, we're nowhere close to done. So we're going to talk more about primary keys. So one of the most important things we can do is to determine what is a specific row within a table. We may not care about what that row is, but we want to be able to find it very easily. So we use a primary key for that. So we're just doing select star from share, because share is, of course, the table we're in, where share code, which is our primary key, is equal to AR. And you'll notice, because this is a textual value here, we're putting that inside of quotes. We can use either single quotes or we can use double quotes here. It does not matter for most SQL implementations. There are some exceptions to that. But the standard is that it does not matter. You just want to be consistent with whatever you decide to use. So we're going to determine which firm's code is AR. And that's going to return us that value. In this case, it is Alicia, or I'm not even sure what that is, some sort of Ruby. So gives us all the things. If we wanted to just get a certain rows, or certain columns rather, we can just put that behind the select statement there. We have lots of different options. We're not limited to using this for primary key. Imagine I knew the share code name. I could do where share firm equals whatever this is. We have lots of different options there. And we could also do some additional things where it's inside. We'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah, so basically, this is just showing what it's talked about, where you're not limited to using this for only primary keys. In this case, they're using share dividend. If it's equal to 2.5, we have two records that that's the case, so it returns them both. Now, as I just said, you may have a case where you're interested in something that contains more than one single value. So you could do that using an in statement, or you could do that using or statement. So I think the in statement is probably going to be the cleaner way to do this. Certainly, it's going to be a little bit easier. You're not having to do or equals. You could just do it in a clean fashion. So you get select star from share, which is, of course, a table where share code is included in. So you just say in, and then you do an open parentheses, put the share codes in quotes. So we're getting the FC, the AR, and the SLG. Close off the parenthetical statement, and then put a semicolon at the end. You're good to go. So you're just saying, is it included within this list of values? Another way you could do it, there's not just one answer here. You could do where share code equals whatever your first value is. Do an or, share code equals whatever your second value is. Do another or. If you had maybe 50 different values, that's going to be pretty tedious to write. It's also going to be pretty confusing to look through. So you'd probably want to avoid that and go with the first option. The main thing here is just remember the syntax is it's going to be in parentheses. So you get parentheses. As with anything in SQL, you're going to divide the 2 or 3 or 4, however many you have, by commas. And then, of course, because we're in a text value, we're going to use quotes. If you were not inside of a text value, you would not use quotes. So that's basically what you have to do. Then in addition to that, we also want to determine what is not included within values. So again, if we want to use the clean, kind of simple syntax, we do the first option here. We select star from share, where share code not in. Then we have the open parentheses, put their first value, comma, second value, so on and so forth. We want to have more values not included. Close off the parentheses, end it with a semicolon. We could also do select star from share where share code is not equal to. That's what those kind of open and close symbols right there are. Not equal to and not equal to share code. So we have lots of different options here. It looks like they actually cut off the second PT. So you'd actually have PT there. Of course, you'd end it with the semicolon. So yeah, that's some different ways you could do it. Any questions so far? So again, this is very powerful stuff. Certainly make sure that you're aware of the in, the not in. Those are going to be very important. Now, you probably have noticed we can order our output very easily. So there's two different ways we could order our output. First, we could order the columns. So if I wanted to have the share firm before the share code, all I have to do is whenever I'm doing my select statement, I put the one I want to have first, I put that first. I put the one I want to have second, second, so on and so forth. So that's all going to be done within the select statement. Now that contrasts a little bit with the ordering rows. So if we want to order our rows, we use order by. And order by is going to go pretty much last within our SQL statement. So select always, almost always comes first. Order by almost always comes last. That's if we're wanting to order the specific rows that we're outputting. So that, in other words, we're wanting to sort it by some variable. We do an order by, then whatever the variable is. We can do multiple. So maybe first we want to order by state, then we may want to order by county. That's certainly something we could do. So let's take a look at that. So we're ordering columns. All we're doing is we're just changing the order of our two columns. So first we're putting share code first, share firm. Then we're putting share firm first, share code. That's all we have to do. Quite simple. So if I ask an exam question, how do you order columns inside of a select statement? You just say you put them in whichever order you want to have them output. That's really about the only way to do it. Now again, for ordering rows, in this case, we're just adding one order by share description and then comma share firm. So first we're going to order by the share description for the share PE. So that's going to be in descending. So whatever is the higher value is going to come first. We're going to go down from there. Then we're going to order by share firm. So in this case, you'll see that we had two share price earnings ratios that are the same. So they're both 16. We're going to order by share firm next. Now, in this case, SQL is going to assume that you're going to want it in ascending order for everything. So you have to specify if you want it in descending order. You could also choose to specify ascending order. You would just use ASC. That's perfectly fine to do. However, in most cases, you wouldn't have to specify that. So if you'll see here, F comes before S. Therefore, because we're ordering by share firm second, the F will come first by default. If this said share price earnings ratio descending and share firm descending, then it would be reversed. We would see Sri Lankan gold above Fredonia Cooper. So there's certainly lots of different flexibility that we have here for using the order by. But keep in mind, order by will typically come last. So first thing we're doing is we're selecting everything from share where the share price earnings ratio is greater than or equal to 12. So in this case, we do have a value 12. If we didn't have that greater than equals to, if it were just greater than, we wouldn't see Indian lead and zinc present within our output. So is this making sense to everyone so far? Any questions? Certainly feel free to jump in with any questions. Okay, now let's do some calculations. Now, luckily, we don't have to do them by hand. We can certainly let the SQL do them for us. So what we're going to do here is we're going to cast the value. That's what this as is. This as is casting the value. And we're going to save this as yield. We're not really saving it. We're more outputting it as yield. So what we're doing here is we're selecting the share firm. So we have the share firm here, share price, share quantity. And then we have a comma. We're going to do some math here. We're taking share division, or share dividends rather, dividing that by share price, multiplying that by 100 to give us the yield. So of course we're expressing this as some sort of percentage, and then we're getting this from the share table. So we're selecting certain columns, and then we're adding in a column as we go. It's pretty cool. So we could do whatever we wanted to here. If we go back to the data that we have, maybe we want to calculate the amount that we have. So we could do select maybe share firm, comma, share price times share quantity to get and we could save that as value. So we would do something like select share firm, comma, share price times share quantity as value. And then we just do all we need there. So certainly something we could do. Yeah. Any other questions so far? Okay, so talking a little bit more about the different functions we have, we can get the count of things. We can count how many records we have. We can count how many variables we have. We have lots of options for using that count. We can get the average of something. We can get the sum. We can get the minimum value, maximum value. Lots of different values we can get. So an example of that could be select the average. You're going to want to do an open and close parentheses. Put whatever value you want the average of inside those parentheses. In this case, you're going to save that as average dividend from share. So it's just going to give us the average dividend value that's within inside of our table. Then we want to get maybe the average yield for the portfolio. So in this case, we're going to have to get the yield. So we're calculating that first, but then we're getting the average of that yield. So you think back to this question here. We got the yield, share dividend divided by share price times 100, getting the average of that. And then we're casting that as average yield from share. So again, there's lots of different functions that you can use within inside of SQL. Very powerful. Now again, if you want to count every single row and just know how many rows are included inside of a table, you would just use count star. So in this case, you would do select count star from whatever table you're interested in getting a count of. But that's not necessarily what you'd always want to do with count. There could certainly be some cases in which you'd want to count specific instances of a variable. So you may want to see how often does a specific column have values. So you do count column name. So you do select count column name from table. Certainly something you want to do there. So yeah, you can certainly do that. Any other questions? So I talked a little bit earlier about why one of the reasons you'd want to use a semicolon is to avoid having a subquery that you didn't intend to happen. So you can actually run a query inside of a query, if that makes sense. So basically what you want to do here is you're selecting something that you have to calculate. You want to see, is it larger? So for example, if they get here, report the firms with a PE ratio greater than the average for the portfolio. Well, the problem is that you cannot do that without having one query referencing another query. You can't just do select share firm where larger than the average, because you have to calculate the average first. So it wouldn't really make sense to add that average in a lot of cases. You just want to go ahead and select it. So what you would do is you would do select share firm, share PE from share, where, and this is where you're actually setting that condition, where you're getting the things that exceed the average. So you would do where whatever you're wanting to have compared. In this case, is share PE. We want to see where it's greater than the average share PE. So to do that, we just do greater than, we do an open parentheses, put in our new select statement, which is a subquery. So that's going to be select average share price, or share price to earnings ratio rather, from share. So that's what we're doing here. We're just adding in a second little subquery, and we're comparing the share price to earnings ratio with that subquery. So a little bit confusing, but that's all we have to do there. So any questions about this subquery? Again, we can really do lots of things with subqueries. Subqueries are always going to go inside the where. So we want to determine what we want to have output, what specific records. We're going to put that inside the where. We're going to have some sort of comparison in most cases. And this could be greater than, this could be less than, greater than equal to, it could be equals to. We have lots of different options here. Okay, let's also talk about the regular expression. This is just a way of saying text contained in. So basically, we would see an example of this. We want to see, do any of our records contain this text? So we're going to use regexp. That's basically what we're talking about, regular expression. So a specific example of this could be firms that contain Ruby somewhere in their name. So we're just going to do select share firm from share. Pretty straightforward. Where share firm regexp, that means contains Ruby. So because we're using text here, of course, we're going to put that inside of quotes just to make sure that we're realizing that's a text variable. Closing it off with a good friend, the semicolon. And then we're going to determine which firms have Ruby somewhere in their name. So this could be at the end in this case. It could be at the beginning. It could be in the middle. If any of our text within this specific variable share firm contains Ruby, we're going to go ahead and return that. Because in this case, all we're doing is we're selecting share firm. What if this said select star from share, where share firm regex Ruby? What will we see differently? If instead of saying select share firm, what if we said select star? Damien, what do you think? Yeah, it would have all of our variables there for Abyssian Ruby. I guess that's how you say it. Yeah, that's exactly correct. So we can say whatever we want to. We could say select share code, comma, share firm. We could just get share firm. We could just select star. Lots of different options here. The main thing we're adding here is we're adding in the regular expression, which allows us to search for containing whatever text we want. So certainly something we could do. Now we're not limited to only doing containing. We could do different alternates. So in this case, we're looking for anything that contains gold, zinc, gold, or zinc. So we certainly have some different alternatives here. If we're going to do that, we're going to use the alternative symbol. So that's just going to be straight up and down line. On your keyboard, it should be directly below the backspace key. So, you know, if you're talking about in mathematics, this would be some group containing any of these values. This is equivalent to saying or, basically. So it's certainly something we could do. We could also limit where the regular expression is contained within inside of a specific value. So to do that, all we have to do is just use our good friend, the little upward-facing caret. I believe that's the name of it. I'm not sure the specific name of that character. But it's this character right here, where it's basically just pointing upward. We think of this as like an exponential, something like that. That's telling us to start at the beginning. So if we had, going back to this example here, if we had only starting with gold, we'd have the upwards facing caret, gold. And then only firms that began with gold would be included with inside of that. So we have lots of different options. If we want to do it at the end, we just use our good friend, the $sign. So in this case, we're going to list the firms whose name end in Geese. So we're just doing a select share firm. That's what we want from our share table, where share firm contains Geese. And this $sign means at the end. So the last characters in that are going to be G-E-E-S-E. $sign, of course, does not have to be included. But that's saying it's going to end there. So that's a special character there. So we could list the names whose name contain sheep or geese. So how will we do this? Well, we'd start off with saying select share firm. Share firm is going to be the name from share, where share firm, regex. And then we do open parentheses. We would do sheep, do our straight up and down symbol. Geese, close parentheses, semicolon. Of course, I forgot to put those sheep and geese inside of quotes. Make sure you do that. Single or double is fine as long as you're consistent. And that's all you'd have to do there. Now, we could also get things that are distinct. So this can be very useful if we're wanting to find how many unique values we have within something. So, for example, if we want to get the count, we could do count distinct as we do here. So we're saying how many different PE ratios do we have? We're not just getting the count of the PE ratios. We're getting the count of the unique PE ratios. So we're going to use the distinct modifier for that. So all we have to do here is just do select, count, open parentheses, distinct. So distinct, of course, being a word that's not within quotes, we're going to, that's going to be a modifier there. Share price to earnings as different PEs. You can put anything you wanted to there. So you're casting this value as something. You could call it anything. I'd recommend you call it something logical. You could call this unique PEs. Certainly something you could do from the share table. So that's certainly what we're doing there. Then, of course, you could also do things like removing your duplicate rows. So if you're just wanting to get the share price to earnings ratio included within your data set, and you're wanting to only return unique values of that, all you have to do is just select distinct share price earnings ratio from share. So certainly something we could do. Now here's a question for you guys. What if we wanted to get the unique primary key? Do we have to use distinct for that? We only want to return the unique primary keys. Kind of a trick question. Charlie, what do you think? Do you think we have to have the distinct modifier to select the distinct primary keys? So if we're just wanting to get, in this case, the distinct primary key would be share code, I believe. Well, so the primary key is already constrained to be unique. So, you know, in practice, you wouldn't actually have to use the distinct modifier if you're only wanting to get a column that has a constraint on it that is unique. So in this case, we had two different columns that had the unique constraint. The share code was the ticker for each firm, and that was primary key. So it's implied that it's going to be unique. And then we also applied the distinct modifier, actually unique constraint rather, to the share firm, which is a company name. So those two things we wouldn't actually have to use distinct on if we wanted to get all the unique values, because it'd be impossible for us to insert data that repeats either of those two columns. For any other column, however, you would want to use that distinct modifier if you wanted to get the distinct values from it. So in this case, we can see that we have a firm that has a PE ratio of 3, 6, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 16. I'm not sure what this value would be, but there are certainly cases in which you'd want to know all the unique values that are inside of a column. I'm just not sure in this specific case where it'd be useful. Certainly something you could do. Then, of course, we could also delete rows. So I want to caution, this is for deleting a row. We could also later delete specific tables. We just use the drop function instead of using delete. But in this case, we're going to remove certain rows within here. So we're deleting from our share table where share firm equals Burmese elephant. So in this case, we're assuming that we're selling all of our holdings within the Burmese elephant firm. So we're going to do delete, and we're just going to remove the entire row. That's what we're doing here, from share where share firm is equal to Burmese elephant. So we could put whatever we want to there, and we're going to delete anything where that holds true. Of course, we could also go ahead and update some information we have inside of our table. So in this case, we're updating our share table. We're setting the share price equal to 31.50, where the share code is FC. So we're only going to change the share price where the share code is FC. So we're not going to change it for anything else. But keep in mind the order of this is going to be update set where. Where almost always comes toward the end. There are very few things that are come after where. You know, one of the examples of something that's going to come after where is group by and sort by. But we'll get to that. Certainly some different things here. So we just have a couple more slides. Increase the total number of shares for Nigerian geese by 10% because of some reason. So we just do update. We put our table name. Then we set share quantity to share quantity times 1.1. That's just an increase of 10%. And then we're going to do this where the share firm equals Nigerian geese. So certainly we have that option. We could really do this in any way. So instead of doing instead of set share quantity to share quantity times 1.1, we could go ahead and manually calculate the value. So imagine if the current share quantity were 100, instead of putting in share quantity times 1.1, we could also just input share quantity equals 110. So we have different options for how we do this. SQL could be very flexible. This may be an easier way if you know that it's increasing by a certain amount, as opposed to the specific value that it will go to. So just kind of wrap things up. Talk about the different types of quotes. Most of the time, MySQL will treat single quote and double quote the same. The exception is if you're inside of a specific case. So they use the example here, the last name O'Hara. because you're using a double quote to, kind of have the textual value inside of it, use a single quote to represent the first and the last name. It's really just one name there. So O'Hara is the last name. I think it's better practice to use a backslash. So instead of using a double quote and relying on the fact that if you use a single quote inside the double quote, it won't end the value, I think it's better practice to use a backslash. So instead of saying open double quote O single quote O'Hara closing the double quote, you could also just say open quote O backslash single quote O'Hara closes the double quote. So I think it's better practice. I'd certainly recommend it. But then also you have this the back key. Basically what this is for is if you have a column name that is multiple words, so it has a space in there. So typically you just go ahead and use the back symbol, which is just going to be beside the 1 on your keyboard. So it's on the same key as the tilde. And basically you can just do that. Now, I would go ahead and say it's not best practice to have any sort of column inside of a table that uses a space. So it's not something I would test you over, because I don't even think you should have a column that has a space inside of its name. Instead, you'd probably use some form of camel case just to kind of distinguish that. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap everything up today. We talked a little bit about reviewing some of the different entities, attributes, and all that, different data models. And then we also covered a basic overview of some SQL commands we're likely to see. So specifically, we talked about creating tables, talked about inserting records into those tables, selecting information from those tables, deleting certain rows, as well as updating certain rows. Any questions about anything today? All right, well, that's all I had today. Make sure you do the homework. Make sure you also do the exam corrections. I hope you all have a great day.